Leader, she was not supposed to be there. That was the thing Petra Dunmore kept reminding herself of. In those first weeks at Ashfield, she was not supposed to be there, not as a housekeeper's assistant, not scrubbing the hearths of a house that had once belonged to her father, not answering to a woman who did not know her name. But she stayed. Ashfield had belonged to the Dunmore family for 4 generations. Her grandfather had built the East Wing himself, or so the story went. Had laid the cornerstone with his own hands on a gray October morning when the maples were just beginning to turn. Petra had heard that story so many times as a child that she could recite it without thinking. She had grown up believing that one day the house would be hers. Then her father died, and everything changed. The will, or rather, what replaced the will, left Ashfield and all its holdings to a distant relation she had never met. A man named Gideon Stratford, who had distinguished himself in the war and come home with a title the Crown had seen fit to grant him. The Duke of Ashfield, her house, her father's name given to a stranger. Petra had contested it. The solicitor, a thin-lipped man named Mr. Quince, had looked at her across the desk with something close to pity. There were irregularities in the original document, he said. Witnesses who could no longer be located. He was sorry. She did not believe he was sorry. She had nowhere to go, and very little money and a pride that would not let her accept charity from the few friends who offered it. What she had was a plan, and the plan was this: get inside the house, find what had been taken from her, get it back. She called herself Pratt when she applied for the position. It was her mother's maiden name, and she said it without flinching, which surprised her. Mrs. Gale, the housekeeper, hired her in less than 10 minutes. There was always work to be done in a house like Ashfield, Mrs. Gale said, especially now that the new master was expected to arrive before winter. The new master, Lily. Petra had nodded and said yes, ma'am, and carried her single trunk up to the servants' quarters and stood at the window looking out at the grounds she had walked every day of her childhood. The elm tree by the garden wall was still there. Someone had tied a rope swing to the lowest branch. She did not know who had done that. It had not been her. The staff talked about the Duke the way people talk about weather, constantly, in low voices, with some mixture of anticipation and dread. He had been at the front for nearly 3 years. He had come back changed, they said, though none of them had actually seen him yet. Word had come from the house in London, where he had spent 2 months recovering from something, an injury, an illness. No one was entirely sure. Mrs. Gale said it was not her place to ask, and so no one asked, and so the rumor filled the space where the truth should have been. Petra listened, the leader. That was the thing she had learned to do in these weeks of carrying coal scuttles and polishing candlesticks and laying fires in rooms that no one used. She listened, and she learned the shape of the house again, not the shape she had known as a child, when every corridor was familiar and every door unlocked, but the shape it had taken in her absence. Which rooms had been closed, which records were kept in the study, where Mr. Quince sent his correspondence. She was careful, she was patient. She told herself these things mattered more than anger. Most of the time, she almost believed it. He arrived on a Thursday in November, when the ground was just starting to freeze and the sky had that flat pewter look that meant snow before long. Petra was in the entrance hall when the carriage came up the drive. She had been sent to bring extra candles from the storeroom and had stopped, without quite meaning to, at the window. She watched him step down from the carriage. He was taller than she had expected. She did not know why she had expected anything particular. She had never formed a clear image of him in her mind. She had kept him deliberately vague, a figure, without a face. The man who had taken Ashfield. It was easier to be angry at something without edges. He was not without edges. He stood in the drive for a moment, not moving, just looking up at the house. The expression on his face was not what she expected either. the TV. She had expected something like satisfaction, a man arriving to claim what was his. Instead he looked. She searched for the right word, watching him from behind the glass. He looked uncertain, as though he had arrived somewhere he was not entirely sure he was meant to be. Then Mrs. Gale opened the front door, and the moment passed and he went in. Petra picked up the candles and went back to her work. The Duke kept irregular hours. That was the first thing she noticed. He was awake before the fires were lit, walking the east corridor before anyone else was stirring. She had nearly collided with him on her third morning, coming around the corner with an armful of kindling, and had stopped herself just in time. He had not noticed her. He was looking at the paintings, her father's paintings, the row of dark-framed ancestors that lined the hall, and his hands were behind his back, and his face was composed into an expression she could not read. She had stood very still and watched him look at her grandfather's portrait for a long moment. Then he had walked away, and she had let out the breath she had been holding and gone to light the fires. She learned his routines the way she had learned everything else in this house, quietly, without appearing to pay attention. He ate alone, mostly, He spent his mornings in the study, going through what sounded like a great deal of paperwork, from the rustling she could hear when she came to dust the hall outside. He walked the grounds in the afternoons regardless of the weather, following the same path each time, down past the garden wall, through the gate, along the edge of the home wood, back up the long slope to the house that had been her father's path too. She had walked it with him every Sunday morning as a child. She did not know what to make of that. She filed it away alongside all the other things she did not know what to make of. He was not unkind to the staff, that was harder to file away. She had imagined someone impatient, accustomed to being served, the kind of man who never learned the names of the people who cooked his meals. He was not that. He said good morning to the footman who brought his coffee. He thanked the cook, whose name was Mrs. for the soup on a cold evening. She had heard him through the kitchen door, and Mrs. Potts had come back into the kitchen, looking flustered and pleased in equal measure. It would have been simpler if he had been cruel. Petra kept her head down. She did her work. She waited for her opportunity. The opportunity came in December, on a day when Mrs. Gale sent her to tidy the study while the Duke was out walking. She moved quickly. She was not there to dust, or rather, she was there to dust. But she was also there for something else entirely. She had seen Mr. Quince arrive 2 weeks ago with a leather satchel, and she had seen the Duke carry that satchel into the study. And she had not stopped thinking about it since. The desk was orderly. That surprised her. She had expected chaos, the careless disorder of a man who had not expected to be managing an estate. But the papers were stacked with intention, the correspondence separated from the ledgers annotated in a small, precise hand. She found the satchel in the bottom drawer of the cabinet by the window. She was reaching for it when she heard the door. She straightened so fast, she knocked the candlestick on the corner of the desk. It hit the floor with a sound that seemed, in the silence, very loud. The Duke looked at her. She looked at him. He was earlier than he should have been. The sky outside had gone gray and close. He must have come in when the snow started, which it had, she realized, without her noticing. Flakes were already settling on the window glass. "I was told you were walking," she said, and then heard what she had said and felt her face go very still. A servant would not have said that. A servant would have apologized for the candlestick. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, something more careful than that. "The weather changed," he said. "Yes, Your Grace, I'm sorry, the candlestick is undamaged." He picked it up himself, which she had not expected, and set it back on the desk. "You are Pratt, Mrs. Gale's assistant." "Yes, Your Grace." He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Then he said, "Thank you. which was not quite a dismissal but was close enough that she took it as one. She left the study with her hands steady and her heart loud in her chest. After that, he noticed her. She did not want him to. Pictured. It complicated things in ways she did not have words for yet. But there it was, the slight pause when she entered a room, the way his eyes would find her briefly and then look away. No fur, nothing improper, nothing she could have named to Mrs. Gale or complained about, just a quality of attention that had not been there before. She noticed things about him in return, though she tried not to. He did not sleep well. 10. She could tell from the dark smudges under his eyes some mornings, from the way the candle in his bedroom was still burning at an hour when the rest of the house had long gone dark. She had been awake herself one night, sitting at the small table in her room going through what she remembered of her father's papers, and she had seen the thin line of light under his door as she passed the corridor below. She had stood there for a moment, thinking about the uncertainty she had seen on his face when he first arrived. Then she had gone back to her room and locked the door and told herself it was none of her concern. The solicitor, Mr. Quince, came back in January. Petra happened to be in the hall when they emerged from the study. She was not entirely certain she had happened, and she heard the Duke say, in a voice quiet enough that he perhaps did not intend it to carry, "There should have been a daughter, the original family. What became of her?" Mr. Quince said something she could not hear. The Duke said, "That seems insufficient." And then they moved away, and she could not hear any more, and she stood in the hall with a duster in her hand, and her pulse beat strangely, and thought, he knows, or he suspected, which was not the same thing. But it was something. It was Mrs. Gale, who undid her in the end, or began to. It was a small thing. Peter. Petra had been carrying a tray of mended linens up to the airing cupboard, and she had passed the library, and inside the library, someone had left the window open, and the wind had knocked a book from the shelf. She had set down the tray and gone in to pick it up. It was a volume of English history, very old, and it was open to a page about Northumberland, a name she recognized, a family she recognized, and she had read 2 sentences before she understood why the passage was familiar. Her grandmother had read it aloud to her once, sitting in this very library, in this very chair. She did not mean to cry. She had not cried in months. She had made a particular point of not crying, because crying was the kind of thing that could not be unnoticed by a household full of people who watched each other closely in the long winter months. But she was sitting in the chair with the book in her lap when the Duke walked in. He stopped. She looked up and could not in that moment make her face do what she needed it to do. He did not leave. He stood very still for a moment, and then he came and sat in the chair opposite Bill, which was what her father had always done when she was upset as a child, and she did not know how to explain to herself why that made it worse. "That book," he said quietly, "was on a list the previous solicitor gave me, items of particular significance to the Dunmore family." She looked at him. "Not have said that," he said. He did not look away. "Why did you?" she asked, and it was not the voice she used with Mrs. Gale. It was not the voice of someone who called herself Pratt. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the winter light was failing, and the library was going gray around them. "Because," he said, "I think you have been very honest with me in every way that matters, and I have been perhaps less honest in return." She put the book down on the side table. Her hands were not shaking, but it required something. "Who told you?" she said. "No one told me." He paused. "Your grandfather laid the cornerstone of the East Wing in October. There is a record of it in the estate papers, the date, the weather, the names of those present." He looked at her steadily. "Your name is not Pratt." The room was very quiet. "No," she said, "it is not." She had imagined this moment differently. She had imagined it with lawyers present, with papers and demands, and the cold specific language of property and rights. She had not imagined it in the library at dusk, with snow collecting on the window ledge, and a man who looked at her as though he were trying to understand something that had been troubling him for weeks. Bitter. "Why did you come back this way?" he asked, not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Because I had no other way," she said, "because Mr. Quince would not see me, and the court would not hear me, and I had nothing left to prove what this house was, except the house itself. What is in it? What I remember about it." She looked at him directly for the first time without calculating what she was revealing. "I know where my father's study notes are hidden. I know which floorboards in this room creak. I know that the elm tree in the garden was planted the year my parents were married, and that the rope swing is new, and that whoever put it there, I don't know who that was." Something in his face shifted. It was not pity. Hidden. She would have been able to bear it less if it had been pity. "I put it there," he said, "in September. There were children from the village who came to help with the harvest, and they kept looking at the tree." She had not expected that. She had not expected most of this. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and outside the snow was falling steadily now, the way it did sometimes in January, silent and without apology. "The papers that were taken," she said, "the original will. I believe Mr. Quince knows where they are." "I believe so too," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I would like your help finding them, if you are willing to remain in the house." "As what?" she said. She did not say it unkindly. She meant it honestly. Beer. He was quiet for longer this time. "As yourself," he said finally. "I think that would be a start." She stayed. She stayed, and the weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. Stranger even than the months of living in her own house as a stranger to it, because now she was neither the woman she had been pretending to be, nor the woman she had been before, even. She was something in between, something unnamed, walking the corridors of Ashfield in the mornings and sitting across the desk from the Duke in the evenings as they went through the estate papers together, looking for what had been taken. He was methodical. She had not expected that, either. She had imagined the military in him as impatient, decisive. But he was patient in the way that came from having learned what haste could cost. He checked each document twice. He wrote his questions down and returned to them. He made her feel in a way she did not quite understand that her knowledge of this house was something of value rather than a wound. Mr. Quince, it turned out, had made a very particular kind of error, the kind that looked like carefulness but was in fact concealment in them. When the Duke presented his questions with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 3 years learning to give nothing away, Quince answered for 2 hours and then produced, from a case he had brought apparently without expecting to need it, the original document. Her father's handwriting, her name clearly written without ambiguity. She sat very still looking at it. The Duke said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I think you had better take that." She looked at him. "Billy, I was never meant to have this house," he said. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said most things. "A title, perhaps. A stipend," he tittered. "There was an arrangement between my regiment and the Crown that I did not fully understand when I accepted it. I did not know what had been taken from whom." She believed him. She was not certain she should believe him so easily, but she did. "What happens now?" she said. "That is a legal matter," he said. "It will take time, Mr. Edie. Quince will not enjoy the next several months." He paused. "But the house, Ashfield, it does not need to be emptied while the courts decide, if you wish to remain." He was not quite looking at her. She noticed that. She had noticed over these weeks a number of things about him. The way he walked the grounds without a coat in temperatures that had the footmen wincing. The way he went quiet before he said something he meant, leered. The way he had begun to look at her differently than he looked at anyone else in the house. Not the way people looked at servants. Not quite the way people looked at equals either. something that did not have a name in any of the social categories she had grown up navigating. Or, she had not been entirely unmoved by it. That was honest. "I have been managing this house for 3 months," she said. "Mrs. Gale will tell you I am adequate at it," which from Mrs. Gale means something. His mouth did something near a smile. "She said you were the best assistant she'd had in 10 years. "Then perhaps," Petra said. "The more relevant question is whether you intend to keep Mrs. Gale." Bitter. "I intend to keep everyone," he said, and then a pause. Biddy. "If everyone is willing to stay." It was not the most direct thing that had ever been said to her. Cheered thee. It was not a declaration or a proposal or any of the things that came next in the kind of story she had read as a girl in this very library. But it was honest, and it was careful, and it was exactly the kind of thing that a man said when he meant something he did not yet know how to say plainly. She understood that language. She had been speaking it herself for months. "I am willing," she said. Spring came to Ashfield the way it always had. Slowly, then all at once the garden wall going green before anything else, and then the elm tree, and then the long slope to the home wood, turning from brown to the particular pale gold that meant things were beginning again. The legal matter took, as he had predicted, several months. It was not simple. Mr. Quince made several attempts to complicate it further, each of which the Duke met with the same unhurried, methodical patience that Petra had come to recognize as one of his more formidable qualities. She was present for most of it. He asked her to be, and she was. There came a morning in April when her name was restored to the Ashfield deed. She stood in the solicitor's office. A different solicitor, one the Duke had found, a dry-voiced woman named Mrs. who seemed to find the entire situation professionally interesting and signed her actual name for the first time in months on a document that mattered. Petra Dunmore. She had not known how much she had missed seeing it written down. Gideon. The Duke. She had started to think of him as Gideon, though she had not said it aloud yet, stood near the window while she signed. He had said almost nothing that morning, which was not unusual, but there was something different about his quiet today, a quality of waiting. On the carriage ride back to Ashfield, she said, "You could have fought it." "Oh, yes," he said. "The claim was legitimate. You had the title." "I had a title," he said. "The house was never legitimately mine, and I knew it by January." A pause. "I should have acted sooner. I am sorry that I did not." Did he? She looked at him. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment in the way she had learned, meant he was trying to say something truthfully rather than conveniently. "Because I did not want to," he said. "Not yet. I am not proud of that." The carriage moved through the lanes. The hedgerows were coming in thick and green. She said, "The house is mine now, legally." "Yes," he said. "You are still the Duke of Ashfield. A title without land, of this morning." He said it without bitterness. "Crown. We'll reassign it, I expect." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the hedgerows gave way to the open fields on the edge of the Ashfield grounds, land she had known since childhood, land that was, again, hers. "There is a position," she said, "that has been historically associated with this estate, steward, responsible for management, accounts, correspondence with the tenants." She paused. "Mrs. Gale has been managing above her station for some time. Told me she would welcome some assistance." He was very still. "That is not what I want," he said. His voice was quiet and very level. "You know that." "I know," she said. "I'm asking what you're willing to say plainly." He looked at her. Outside, the gate to the Ashfield Drive came into view, the elm visible beyond it, just budding. "I would like to stay," he said. Hired. "I would like to stay in this house and walk the grounds in the mornings and argue with you about the estate accounts and watch the elm tree come back in the spring. I would like—" He stopped, began again, spelling. "I would like the opportunity to be someone you chose rather than someone who arrived by mistake." She was quiet for a moment. "You were not a mistake," she said. "You were an injustice, Those are different things, Billy. Something in his face shifted, released perhaps. She had not seen that before. The carriage turned through the gate, the drive curved up toward the house, and there it was. Ashfield, in the April morning, the stone pale in the spring light, the windows catching the sun, the garden just beginning to open. She had spent a winter learning to be a stranger in it. She did not intend to be a stranger anymore. "Stay," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said, simple as that, Behind. They were married in October, when the maples were turning, in the small church at the edge of the village where her parents had been married before her. Mrs. Gale cried, which she denied afterwards. The elm tree in the garden had gone gold, and the rope swing moved a little in the wind, and the children from the village were there at the reception in the garden, and ran through the fallen leaves until it was too dark to see. Stood at the edge of the garden with her hand in his, and watched them, and thought about her grandfather, laying the cornerstone on a morning like this one, gray and bright in equal measure, the maples turning, the house behind him, solid and plain, and entirely itself. Some things were worth waiting for. Some things were worth the long, patient, difficult work of getting back at thee, and some things. She had not expected this part, had not planned for it, had not known to. Some things arrived when you were not looking and turned out to be exactly what the house had been missing all along.